Tonight, the valley feels complete, not because it has changed, but because everything that needed to unfold has unfolded. Through every quiet step, through every restrained moment, through every breath taken in stillness, this wilderness has carried us patiently forward, and now we stand at its final, quiet edge. If you have journeyed from the beginning, you may feel the calm certainty in the air. There is no tension left here, no waiting, only understanding. Welcome back to the Three Rivers country. If this is your first night here, you have arrived at the final resting place of silence. You do not need to retrace the path behind us. Just listen, because endings in the wilderness are not loud. They are steady. Before we continue, take one slow breath in and let it go gently. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Let the thoughts soften completely. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to anticipate, only the quiet completion of what has already begun. In Parken. Now we return for the final time to the Valley of Silent Men, Part 10, Chapter 19, to the cabin. Kent groped his way and knocked, and it was Marette who opened the door for him and stepped back for him to enter. Like a great wet dog he came in, doubling until his hands almost touched the floor. He sensed the incongruity of it, the misplacement of his overgrown body in this playhouse thing, and he grinned through the trickles of wet that ran down his face and tried to see. Marette had taken off her turban and raincoat, and she too stooped low in the 4 feet space of the cabin, but not so ridiculously low as Kent. He dropped on his knees again, and then he saw that in the tiny stove fire was burning. The crackle of it rose above the beat of the rain on the roof, and the air was already mellowing with the warmth of it. He looked at Marette. Her wet hair was still clinging to her face. Her feet and arms and part of her body were wet, but her eyes were shining, and she was smiling at him. She seemed to him, in this moment, like a child, was glad it found refuge. He had thought that the terror of the night would show in her face, She was not thinking of the thunder and the lightning, the black trail, or of Kedsty lying dead in his bungalow. She was thinking of him. He laughed outright. It was a joyous, thrilling thing, this black night, with the storm over their heads and the roll of the great river under them. They too, alone in this cockleshell cabin that was not high enough to stand in and scarcely big enough in any direction to turn round in. The snug cheer of it, the warmth of the fire beginning to reach their chilled bodies, and the inspiring crackle of the birch in the little stove filled Kent for a space with other thoughts than those of the world they were leaving. And Marette, whose eyes and lip were smiling at him softly in the candle glow, seemed also to have forgotten. It was the little window that brought them back to the tragedy of their flight. Kent visioned it, as it must look from the shore, a telltale blotch of light travelling through the darkness. There were occasional cabins for several miles below the landing, and eyes turned riverward in the storm might see it. He made his way to the window and fastened his slicker over it. "We are off, Grey Goose," he said then, rubbing his hands. "Would it seem more home-like if I smoked?" She nodded, her eyes on a slicker at the window. "It is pretty safe," said Kent, fishing out his pipe and beginning to fill it. "Everybody asleep probably, but we will not take any chances." The scow was swinging sideways in the current. Kent felt the change in its movement and added, "No danger of being wrecked, either. There's not a rock or rapids for 30 miles. River clear as a floor. If we bump ashore, do not get frightened." "I'm not afraid of the river," she said. Then, with rather startling unexpectedness, she asked him, "Where will they look for us tomorrow?" Kent lighted his pipe, eyeing her a bit speculatively as she seated herself on the stool, leaning toward him as she waited for an answer to her question. "The woods, the river, everywhere," he said. "They will look for a missing boat, of course. We have simply got to watch behind us and take advantage of a good start. Will the rain wipe out our footprints, James? Yes, everything in the open. But perhaps in a sheltered place." "We were in no sheltered place," he assured her. "Can you remember that we were, Grey Goose?" She shook her head slowly. "No." But there was Mouy under the window. "His footprints will be wiped out. I'm glad. I would not have him, or Monsieur Fingers, or any of our friends brought into this trouble." She made no effort to hide the relief his words brought her. He was a little amazed that she should worry over Fingers and the old Indian in this hour of their own peril. That danger he had decided to keep as far from her mind as possible, but she could not help realizing the impending menace of it. She must know that within a few hours Catesty would be found, and the long arm of the wilderness police would begin its work. And if it caught them, she had thrust her feet toward him and was wriggling them inside her boots so that he heard the slushing sound of water. "But they are wet," she shivered. "Will you unlace them and pull them off for me, James?" He laid his pipe aside and knelt close to her. It took him 5 minutes to get the boots off. Then he held one of her sodden little feet close between his two big hands. "Cold, cold as ice," he said. "You must take off your stockings, Marette, please." He arranged a pile of wood in front of the stove and covered it with a blanket, which he pulled from one of the bunks. Then, still on his knees, he drew the cane chair close to the fire and covered it with a second blanket. A few moments later, Marit was tucked comfortably in this chair, with her bare feet on the blanketed pile of wood. Kent opened the stove door. Then he extinguished one of the smoking candles, and after that, the other. The flaming birch illumined the little cabin with a mellower light. It gave a subdued flush to the girl's face. Her eyes seemed to Kent wonderfully soft and beautiful in that changed light. And when he had finished, she reached out a hand, and for an instant it touched his face and his wet hair so lightly that he sensed the thrilling caress of it without feeling its weight. "You are so good to me, James," she said, and he thought there was a little choking note in her throat. He had seated himself on the floor, close to her chair, with his back to the wall. "It is because I love you, Grey Goose," he replied quietly, looking straight into the fire. She was silent. She too was looking into the fire. Close over their heads, they heard the beating of the rain, like 1,000 soft little fists pounding the top of the cabin. Under them they could feel the slow swinging of the scow as it responded to the twists and vagaries of the current that was carrying them on. And Kent, unseen by the girl, who was looking away from him, raised his eyes. The birch light was glowing in her hair. It trembled on her white throat. Her long lashes were caught in the shimmer of it. And looking at her, Kent thought of Kedsty, lying back in his bungalow room, choked to death by a tress of that glorious hair, so near to him now that by leaning a little forward he might have touched it with his lips. The thought brought him no horror, for even as he looked, one of her hands crept up to her cheek, the small, soft hand that had touched his face and hair as lightly as a bit of thistledown, and he knew that 2 hands like that could not have killed a man who was fighting for life where he died. And Kent reached up and took the hand and held it close in his own as he said, "Little Grey Goose, please tell me now what happened in Kedsty's room." His voice thrilled with an immeasurable faith. He wanted her to know, no matter what had happened, that this faith and his love for her could not be shaken. He believed in her and would always believe in her. Already he was sure that he knew how Kedsty had died. The picture of the tragedy had pieced itself together in his mind, bit by bit. While he slept, Marit and a man were down in the big room with the inspector of police. The climax had come, and Kedsty was struck a blow, in some unaccountable way, with his own gun. Then, just as Kedsty was recovering sufficiently from the shock of the blow to fight, Maret's companion had killed him. Horrified, dazed by what had already happened, perhaps unconscious, she had been powerless to prevent the use of a tress of her hair in the murderer's final work. Kent, in this picture, eliminated the bootlaces and the curtain cords. He knew that the unusual and the least expected happen frequently in crime, and Meret's long hair was flowing loose about her. To use it had simply been the first inspiration of the murderer. And Kent believed, as he waited for her answer now, that Meret would tell him this. And as he waited, he felt her fingers tighten in his hand. "Tell me, Grey Goose, what happened?" "I do not know, Jeeves." His eyes went to her suddenly from the fire, as if he was not quite sure he had heard what she had said. She did not move her head, but continued to gaze unseeingly into the flames. Inside his palm, her fingers worked to his thumb and held it tightly again, as they had clung to it when she was frightened by the thunder and lightning. "I do not know what happened, James." This time he did not feel the clinging thrill of her little fingers and soft palm. Deep within him he experienced something that was like a sudden, unexpected blow. He was ready to fight for her until his last breath was gone. He was ready to believe anything she told him. Anything except this impossible thing which she had just spoken. For she did know what had happened in Ketsty's room. She knew, unless suddenly his heart leaped with joyous hope. "You mean you were unconscious?" he cried in a low voice that trembled with his eagerness. "You fainted, and it happened then?" She shook her head. "No, I was asleep in my room. I did not intend to sleep, but something awakened me. I thought I had been dreaming, but something kept pulling me downstairs. And when I went, I found Ketsty like that. He was dead. I was paralyzed, standing there when you came." She drew her hand away from him, gently but significantly. "I know you cannot believe me, James. It is impossible for you to believe me." "And you do not want me to believe you, Maret?" "Yes, I do. You must believe me. But the tress of hair, your hair, round Ketsty's neck." He stopped. His words, spoken gently as they were, seemed brutal to him. Yet he could not see that they affected her. She did not flinch. He saw no tremor of horror. Steadily, she continued to look into the fire, and his brain grew confused. Never in all his experience had he seen such absolute and unaffected self-control, and somehow it chilled him. It chilled him even as he wanted to reach out and gather her close in his arms and pour his love into her ears, entreating her to tell him everything, to keep nothing back from him that might help in the fight he was going to make. And then she said, "James, if we should be caught by the police, it would probably be quite soon, would not it? They will not catch us. But our greatest danger of being caught is right now, is not it?" she insisted. Kent took out his watch and leaned over to look at it in the firelight. "It is 3 o'clock, he said. For a moment or two more she was silent. Then her hand reached out, and her fingers twined softly round his thumb again. "James, when we are safe, when we are sure the police will not find us, I will tell you all that I know about what happened in Ketsty's room, and I will tell you about the hair. I will tell you." Her fingers tightened almost fiercely. "Everything," she repeated. "I will tell you about that in Ketsty's room, and I will tell you about myself. And after that, I am afraid you will not like me." "I love you," he said. making no movement to touch her. "No matter what you tell me, Grey Goose, I shall love you." She gave a little cry, scarcely more than a broken note in her throat, and Kent, had her face been turned toward him then, would have seen the glory that came into it and into her eyes, like a swift flash of light, and pass so swiftly away. What he did see, when she turned her head, were eyes caught suddenly by something at the cabin door. He looked. Water was trickling in slowly over the sill. "I expected that," he said cheerfully. "Our scow is turning into a rain barrel, Maret. Unless I bail out, we will soon be flooded. And while I am doing that, I want you to take off your wet things and tuck yourself into bed. Will you, Grey Goose? I am not tired, but if you think it is best." Her hand touched his arm. "It is best," he said, and for a moment he bent over her until his lips touched her hair. Then he seized a pail. Chapter 20. It was that hour when, with clear skies, the grey northern dawn would have been breaking faintly over the eastern forests. Kent found the darkness more fog-like. About him was a greyer, ghostlier sort of gloom. But he could not see the water under his feet, nor could he see the rail of the scow or the river. From the stern, 10 feet from the cabin door, the cabin itself was swallowed up and invisible. With the steady, swinging motion of the riverman, he began bailing. So regular became his movements that they ran in a sort of rhythmic accompaniment to his thoughts. The monotonous splash, splash, splash. Even in the rain, the tang of cedar and balsam came to him faintly, but it was the river that impressed itself most upon his senses. It seemed to him, as the minutes passed, like a living thing. He could hear it gurgling and playing under the end of the scow, and with that sound there was another and more indescribable thing, the tremble of it, the pulse of it, the thrill of it in the impenetrable gloom, the life of it as it swept on in a slow and mighty flood between its wilderness walls. Kent had always said, "You can hear the river's heartbeat if you know how to listen for it," and he heard it now. He felt it. The rain could not beat it out, nor could the splash of the water he was throwing overboard drown it, and the darkness could not hide it from the vision that was burning like a living coal within him. Always it was the river that had given him consolation in times of loneliness. For him, it had grown into a thing with a soul, a thing that personified hope, courage, comradeship, everything that was big and great in final achievement. And tonight, for he still thought of the darkness as night, the soul of it seemed whispering to him a sort of plan he could not lose. That was the thought that filled him. Never had his pulse beat with greater assurance, never had a more positive sense of the inevitable possessed him. It was inconceivable, he thought, even to fear the possibility of being taken by the police. He was more than a man fighting for his freedom alone, more than an individual struggling for the right to exist, a thing vastly more priceless than either freedom or life. If they were to be accepted alone, it waited for him in the little cabin. shut in by its sea of darkness. He emphasized that their world, the world which, in an elusive and unreal sort of way, had been a part of his dreams all his life, in that world they would shut themselves in. No one would ever find them at the glory of the sun, and the stars and God's open country would be with them always. Maret was the very heart of that reality which impinged itself upon him now. He did not worry about what it was she would tell him tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. He believed that it was then, when she had told him what there was to tell, and he still reached out his arms to her, that she would come into those arms. And he knew that nothing that might have happened in Kedsty's room would keep his arms from reaching to her. Such was his faith, potent as the mighty flood, hidden in the grey ghost gloom of approaching dawn, yet he did not expect to win easily. As he worked, his mind swept up and down the 3 rivers, from the landing to Fort Simpson, and mentally he pictured the situations that might arise and how he would triumph over them. He figured that the men at barracks would not enter Kedsty's bungalow until noon at the earliest. The police gasoline launch would probably set out on a river search soon after. By mid-afternoon, the scow would have a 50-mile start. Before darkness came again, they would be through the death chute, where Follette and the Douceur swam their mad race for the love of a girl. And not many miles below the chute was a swampy country where you could hide the scow. Then they would start overland, west and north, till another sunset, and they would be safe. This was what he expected. But if it came to fighting, he would fight. The rain had slackened to a thin drizzle by the time he finished his bailing. The aroma of cedar and balsam came to him more clearly, and he heard more distinctly the murmuring surge of the river. He tapped again at the door of the cabin, and Maret answered him. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals. When he entered, again he fell on his knees and took off his dripping slicker. The girl greeted him from the berth. "You look like a great bear, James." There was a glad, welcoming note in her voice. He laughed and drew the stool beside her and managed to sit on it, the roof compelling him to bend his head over a little. "I feel like an elephant in a bird cage," he replied. "Are you comfortable, little grey goose?" "Yes." "But you, James, you are wet." "But so happy that I do not feel it." Grey goose. He could make her out only dimly there in the darkness of the berth. Her face was a pale shadow, and she had loosened her damp hair so that the warmth and dry air might reach it more easily. Kent wondered if she could hear the beating of his heart. He forgot the fire, and the darkness grew thicker. He could no longer see the pale outline of her face, and he drew back a little, possessed by the thought that it was sacrilegious to bend nearer to her, like a thief in that gloom. She sensed his movement, and her hand reached to him and lay lightly, with its fingertips touching his arm. "James," she said softly, "I am not sorry now that I came up to Cardigan's place that day when you thought you were dying. I was not wrong. You are different. And I made fun of you then and laughed at you because I knew that you were not going to die. Will you forgive me?" He laughed happily. "It is funny how little things work out sometimes," he said. "Was not a kingdom lost once upon a time because some fellow did not have a horseshoe? And you came to me and I am here with you now. Because of what? She whispered. Because of something that happened a long time ago, he said. Something you would not dream could have anything to do with you or with me. Shall I tell you about it, Maret? Her fingers pressed slightly upon his arm. Yes. Of course, it is a story of the police, he began, and I will not mention this fellow's name. You may think of him as that red-headed O'Connor, if you want to, but I do not say that it was he. He was a constable in the service, and had been away north looking up some Indians who were brewing an intoxicating liquor from roots. That was 6 years ago. And he caught something, le mort rouge, we sometimes call it, the Red Death, or smallpox, and he was alone when the fever knocked him down, 300 miles from anywhere. His Indian ran away at the first sign of it, and he had just time to get up his tent before he was flat on his back. I will not try to tell you of the days he went through. It was a living death, and he would have died. There is no doubt of it, if it had not been for a stranger who came along. He was a white man, Maret. It does take a great deal of nerve to go up against a man with a gun. With a gun, when you've got a gun of your own. And it does not take such a lot of nerve to go into battle when 1,000 others are going with you. But it does take nerve to face what that stranger faced, and the sick man's nothing to him. He went into that tent and nursed the other back to life. Then a sickness got him, and for 10 weeks those two were together, each fighting to save the other's life, and they won out. But the glory of with the stranger, he was going west. The constable was going south. They shook hands and parted. Maret's fingers tightened on Kent's arm, and Kent went on. And the constable never forgot Grey Goose. He wanted the day to come when he might repay, and the time came. It was years later, and it worked out in a curious way. A man was murdered, and the constable, who had become a sergeant now, had talked with the dead man only a little while before he was killed, returning for something he had forgotten. It was the sergeant who found him dead. Very shortly afterward, a man was arrested. There was blood on his clothing. The evidence was convincing, deadly. And this man, Kent paused, and in the darkness, Maret's hand crept down his arm to his hand, and her fingers closed round it. Was the man light to save? She whispered. Yes. When the half-breed's bullet caught me, I thought it was a good chance to repay Sandy McTrigger for what he did for me in that tent years before. But it was not heroic. It was not even brave. I thought I was going to die, and that I was risking nothing. And all the time you were lying so splendidly, James. I knew, she cried. Her breath was coming a little excitedly, Both her hands, instead of one, were gripping his hand now. "I knew that you did not kill John Barclay," she repeated. "And Sandy Mitterid didn't kill him. But he didn't," she interrupted him, almost fiercely. "He was innocent as you were. Jeeves, I know who killed Barclay. Oh, I know. A choking sob came into her throat, and then she added, in a voice which she was straining to make calm, "Do not think that I have not faith in you, because I cannot tell you more now, James," she said. "You will understand quite soon. When we are safe from the police, I shall tell you. I shall keep nothing from you then. I shall tell you about Barclay and Kedsty, everything, but I cannot now. It will not be long. When you tell me we are safe, I shall believe you." And then she withdrew her hands from his and dropped back on her pillow. "And then what?" he asked, leaning far over. "You may not like me, James. I love you," he whispered. "Nothing in the world can stop my loving you, even if I tell you soon that I killed Barclay. No, you would be lying. Or if I told you that I killed Kedsty, no matter what you said, or what proof there might be back there, I would not believe you." She was silent, and then, "James." "Yes, Niska, little goddess. I'm going to tell you something now." He waited. "It is going to shock you, James." He felt her arms reaching up. Her two hands touched his shoulders. "Are you listening?" "Yes, I'm listening, because I'm not going to say it very loud." And then she whispered, "James, I love you." Chapter 21. In the slowly breaking gloom of the cabin, with Marette's arms round his neck, her soft lips given him to kiss, Kent, for many minutes, was conscious of nothing but the thrill of his one great hope on earth come true. What he had prayed for was no longer a prayer, and what he had dreamed of was no longer a dream. Yet, for a space, the reality of it seemed unreal. What he said in those first moments of his exaltation he would probably never remember. His own physical existence seemed a thing trivial and almost lost, a thing submerged and swallowed up by the warm beat and throb of that other life, 1,000 times more precious than his own, which he held in his arms. Yet with the mad thrill that possessed him, in the embrace of his arms, there was an infinite tenderness, a gentleness that drew from Marette's lips a low, glad whispering of his name. She drew his head down and kissed him, and fell upon his knees at her side and crushed his face close down to her, while outside the patter of rain on the roof had ceased and the fog-like darkness was breaking with grey dawn. In that dawn of the new day, Kent came at last out of the cabin and looked upon a splendid world. In his breast was the glory of a thing newborn, and the world, like himself, was changed. Storm had passed. The grey river lay under his eyes. Shoreward he made out the dark outlines of the deep spruce and cedar and balsam forests. About him there was a great stillness, broken only by the murmur of the river and a ripple of water under the scow. Wind had gone with the black rain clouds. As he looked about him, saw the swift dissolution of the last shadows of night, and the breaking in the east of a new paradise. In the east, as the minutes passed, there came a soft The river, all at once, came out of its last drifting haze of fog and night. The scow was about in the middle of the channel. 200 yards on either side were thick green walls of forest, glistening fresh and cool with the wet of storm, and breathing forth the perfume which Kent was drawing deep into his lungs. In the cabin he heard sound. Marette was up, and he was eager to have her come out and stand with him in this glory of their first day. He watched the smoke of the fire he had built, hardwood smoke that drifted up white and clean into the rain-washed air. The smell of it, like the smell of balsam and cedar, was to Kent the aroma of life. And then he began to clean out what was left of the water in the bottom of the scow, and as he worked he whistled. He wanted Marette to hear that whistle. He wanted her to know that day had brought with it, no doubt for him, a great and glorious world was about them and ahead of them, and they were safe. As he worked, his mind became more than ever set upon the resolution to take no chances. He paused in his whistling for a moment to laugh softly and sultanly as he thought of the years of experience which were his surest safeguard now. He had become almost uncannily expert in all the finesse and trickery of his craft of hunting human game, and he knew what the manhunters would do and what they would not do. He had them checkmated at the start, and besides, with Ketzty a corner and himself gone, the landing was short-handed just at present. There was an enormous satisfaction in that. But even with a score of men behind him, Kent knew that he would beat them. His hazard, if there was peril at all, lay in this first day. And with the start they had, he was sure they would pass the death chute, conceal the scow, and take to the untracked forests north and west before the launch could menace them. After that, he would keep always west and north, deeper and deeper into that wild and untraveled country, which would be the last place in which the law would seek for them. He straightened himself and looked at the smoke again, drifting like grey-white lace between him and the blue of the sky. And in that moment, the sun capped the tall green tops of the highest cedars, and day broke gloriously over the earth. For a quarter of an hour longer, Kent mopped at the floor of the scow. Then, with a suddenness that drew him up as if a whiplash had snapped behind him, he caught another aroma in the clean, forest-scented air. It was bacon coffee. He believed that Marette was taking her time in putting on dry footwear and making some sort of morning toilet. Instead of that, she was getting breakfast. It was not an extraordinary thing to do. To fry bacon and make coffee was not, in any sense, a remarkable achievement. She was getting his breakfast and coffee and bacon. To Kent, those two things had always stood for home. They were intimate and companionable. Where there were coffee and bacon, he had known children who laughed, women who sang, and men with happy, welcoming faces. They were home builders. Whenever you smell coffee and bacon at a cabin, O'Connor had always said, they will ask you into breakfast if you knock at the door. But Kent was not recalling his old trail mate's words. In the present moment, all other thoughts were lost in the discovery that Marette was getting breakfast for him. He went to the door and listened. Then he opened it and looked in. Marette was on her knees before the open door of the stove, toasting bread on 2 forks. And now the valley rests completely. What began in silence has returned to silence, but it is not the same silence. It is fuller, calmer, understood. Every question has found its place. Every hesitation has softened. Every step has led exactly where it needed to go. If you are still awake, notice how still your mind feels now, how distant the noise of the world seems. The wilderness has done what it always does. It slows us, it steadies us, it reminds us that strength does not need to speak loudly. And now the Three Rivers country fades gently into memory. But the calm you found here does not fade. It stays with you. It follows you into sleep. It waits for you tomorrow night. Because while this valley story has ended, there are countless others. Other forests, other quiet journeys, other slow voices waiting in the dark. If this story helped you rest, if it helped you empty your thoughts, if it carried you gently into deeper sleep, then there is another story waiting for you, another quiet place, another long slow night. Until then, let your breathing remain slow. Let your body grow heavier. Let sleep come without resistance. And when you are ready to return, I will be here with another valley, another story, another calm night. Sleep deeply and rest in the silence.